In the news tonight, the 193-nation UN General Assembly overwhelmingly approves a resolution to upgrade the Palestinian Authority's observer status at the United Nations from entity to non-member state. The International Syria Mediator says no peace progress in Syria could be made unless it was backed by a UN Security Council resolution, as heavy fighting in the capital Damascus is reported today. And tens of thousands of Egyptians continue their protests against Mohammed Morsi following the approval of the Islamist-led assembly of a new constitution giving the president expanded powers. Good evening and welcome to a new edition of the news. Here are the details. Jordan welcomed the UN General Assembly decision to upgrade the status of Palestine to a non-member state, saying it's a strategic and important step for the Arab-Israeli conflict. Minister of State for Media Affairs and Communications, Samih Al-Ma'aita, said it is now important to capitalize on the decision and to rally international support for the Palestinian people's legitimate rights. The minister said the decision is a confirmation that a two-state solution is the basis to end the Palestinian-Israeli conflict and the formula for a comprehensive Mideast peace. The margin of Israel's defeat in the UN vote that granted de facto statehood to Palestine has disappointed Israeli political leaders who are trying to play down the result. Analysts say the vote exposes the gulf that has opened between Europe and Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu over his handling of the Western-backed administration of Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas and the depth of EU opposition to Jewish settlement. For Palestinians, however, it is a day of jubilation and an honor to see the Palestinian flag flying over the United Nations. Ra'ad Btoush has the details.
Finally, after years of exerting enormous efforts, the Palestinians issued a birth certificate for their still occupied territories. The 29th of November 2012 was the birth date of a de facto Palestinian state at the United Nations General Assembly after Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas called on the world body to approve his long overdue move.
The General Assembly stands before a moral duty, which it must not hesitate to undertake, and stands before a historic duty, which cannot endure further delay, and a practical duty which is urgent to salvage chances for peace and cannot be postponed. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the General Assembly is called upon today to issue a birth certificate of the reality of the State of Palestine.
There were 138 votes in favor, 9 against and 41 abstentions. At least 17 European nations voted in favor of the Palestinian resolution, including Austria, France, Italy, Norway and Spain. Russia also cast a positive vote. Abbas had focused his lobbying efforts on Europe, which supplies much of the aid the Palestinian Authority relies on. Britain, Germany and others chose to abstain. Israel's UN ambassador Ron Prosser, who spoke after Abbas, reiterated Israel's desire for peace with Palestinians but opposed the resolution.
The Palestinians must recognize the Jewish state and they must be prepared to end the conflict with Israel once and for all.
Palestinian Prime Minister Salam Fayyad called the UN vote an extremely significant step, but said he hopes the moment is seized to advance the peace process.
What happened today is extremely significant. It's a step of great deal of symbolism, and it moved us all Palestinians throughout the world. People felt great about it, not only Ramallah, but as you pointed out, throughout Palestine diaspora. Is not a Palestinian or freedom-loving person anywhere in the world who would not really actually appreciate how deep and significant a moment this is.
Head of Hamas government in the Gaza Strip, Ismail Haniyeh, also supported the resolution.
Nothing will scare this Palestinian nation. We seize our rights on the ground as well as our rights in politics. Call on the Palestinian nation to continue in this way and work on this decision to be more practical to establishing the Palestinian state with Jerusalem as a capital and with the return of the refugees.
On the streets of the West Bank, Palestinians were jubilant over the United Nations vote, saying the Palestinian leader made part of their dreams come true. Granting Palestinians the title of a non-member observer state falls short of full UN membership, but it would allow them access to the International Criminal Court and other international bodies. If the Palestinians were to join the International Criminal Court, they could file complaints with the court accusing Israel of crimes against humanity, war crimes and other serious criminal acts. Raad Btoush for the news at 10.
The Arab League endorsed the United Nations decision to upgrade the status of Palestine, while the organization's Secretary General urged the creation of a timeline to end the conflict with Israel. He said what happened yesterday in the General Assembly of the United Nations was a great historic victory.
The last 15 years at least, Israel succeeded in deviating the course for the international community, for the Security Council. And instead of trying to end the conflict, they work in what might be called manage the conflict. Manage a conflict that could go for 1,000 years or something like that.
U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton criticized the UN General Assembly's vote to implicitly recognize a Palestinian state, calling it an unfortunate move that places more obstacles in the path to peace. The UN victory for the Palestinians was a diplomatic setback for the United States and Israel, which were joined by only a handful of countries in voting against the move.
Unfortunate and counterproductive resolution at the United Nations General Assembly that just passed because it places further obstacles in the path to peace. We have been clear that only through direct negotiations between the parties can the Palestinians and Israelis achieve the peace they both deserve. 2 states for 2 people with a sovereign, viable, independent Palestine living side by side in peace and security with a Jewish and democratic Israel.
German Foreign Minister Guido Westerwelle called his country's decision as very balanced, saying when voting, Germany acknowledged the justified desire of the Palestinian people for their own state and the need for a peaceful and stable development in the region. Westerwelle also said the vote must be a reason for renewed direct negotiations between Palestinians and Israelis for a 2-state solution to become possible. He said it was regrettable that Europe did not vote with one voice. And in defiance of the UN vote implicitly recognizing Palestinian statehood, Israel announced it plans to build 3,000 new homes for its settlers in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem. An Israeli official said the Israeli government authorized the construction of the housing units and ordered preliminary zoning and planning work for thousands more. The Haaretz news site described the new homes as a part of a planned construction wave. Israel deems all of Jerusalem its indivisible capital and wants to keep swathes of West Bank settlements under any eventual peace treaty with the Palestinians. The White House said the new Israeli settlement expansion plan is counterproductive and will make it harder to resume Israeli-Palestinian talks. And over to the conflict in Syria. Joint Arab League United Nations Special Representative for Syria, Lakhdar Brahimi, said the peace progress in Syria rests with the UN Security Council. While briefing the 193-nation General Assembly, Brahimi emphasized that there could be no progress on a peace plan unless it was backed by a UN Security Council resolution. He also warned that a ceasefire would only hold if it was overseen by a peacekeeping mission. Brahimi told the General Assembly that while earlier attempts to pass a binding UN resolution had failed, the Council should continue trying. Brahimi also emphasized the shortage of funding for humanitarian assistance in Syria, as well as a growing refugee crisis in the region. He said that military confrontations inside Syria have intensified and that anti-government forces have made gains on the ground.
I know that a first attempt has failed, but that a first attempt to craft such a resolution failed does not mean it will be impossible for other attempts to succeed. Any peace process must include necessarily a binding agreement on the cessation of all forms of violence. As I said earlier, there is no trust between the parties, and for fighting to stop, a strong, well-planned observation system must be put in place. Such observation can best be organized through a large, robust peacekeeping force, and naturally, that cannot be envisaged without a Security Council resolution.
On the ground in Syria, Air Force jets bombarded rebel targets close to the Damascus airport road, forcing some foreign carriers to halt flights to the capital. Activists said security forces clashed with rebels around the Aqraba and Babila districts on the southeastern outskirts of Damascus, leading to the airport. Eyewitnesses said they saw black smoke rising from the east and south of the city and could hear constant shelling. And state television said government forces were fighting rebels in those areas. Elsewhere, at least 12 Lebanese gunmen were killed in a Syrian army ambush in the central Syrian province of Hims. Security sources said the Lebanese men were killed near the town of Tel Kalach and were from northern areas of Lebanon, sympathetic to the revolt against Syrian President Bashar al-Assad. Meanwhile, as Syria was plunged into communication darkness after internet connectivity stopped at midday yesterday, global hacking network Anonymous said it will shut down Syrian government websites around the world. They said the move is in response to what they describe as a government effort to silence the opposition. The Syrian government said terrorists had attacked internet lines, but the opposition and human rights groups suspect it to be the work of the authorities. Anonymous, an affiliation of hacking groups that opposes internet censorship, said it will remove from the internet all web assets belonging to the Syrian government that are outside Syria, starting with embassies. Tens of thousands of Egyptians continued their protests in Cairo's Tahrir Square against President Mohamed Morsi. Today they are chanting, "The people want to bring down the regime." They took to the streets after the Islamist-led assembly raced through approval of a new constitution in a bid to end a crisis over the leader's newly expanded powers. Morsi says the decree that halts court challenges to his decisions was for an exceptional stage and aims to speed up the democratic transition. He told state television yesterday that the decree would end as soon as the people vote on a constitution and affirmed there is no place for dictatorship. Lu'ayb Al-Qar has a story.
Protesters opposed to Egypt's President Mohamed Morsi and the sweeping new powers he assumed last week have gathered in Cairo's Tahrir Square, hours after a new constitution was hastily approved. As the Islamist-dominated Constituent Assembly has finished voting on the draft, Morsi said he will give up his extraordinary powers once the new constitution is approved by a referendum. The referendum on the constitution is a gamble based on the Islamist belief they can mobilize voters again after winning all the elections since Mubarak was ousted. And the president will be able to guarantee the backing of his well-organized brotherhood and Islamist allies, as well as many Egyptians who are simply exhausted by the turmoil. He is expected to approve the document tomorrow, after which he will have 15 days to hold a referendum.
بمرحلة
This is an extremely exceptional period, a very short period. We do not want it to go on for long. So when we try to solve certain issues in this short transitional period that we want to get past quickly, so we can get to a stage where there will again be an elected parliament and there will be a president and government with executive authority, and the judicial authority will be there, which will not be interfered with.
Meanwhile, thousands have taken to the streets in Cairo and other places such as Alexandria and cities on the Suez Canal and in the Nile Delta, responding to opposition calls for a big turnout. Morsi's decree, which gives him sweeping powers, has provoked protest and violence from Egyptians fearing a new dictator was emerging less than 2 years after the ousted Hosni Mubarak. Clashes between opponents and supporters of Morsi, as well as police forces, have killed 3 and injured more than 500, as many people feared that Egypt will witness a new round of bloodshed and violence.
First of all, the referendum cannot take place when all the opposition is out on the streets. And if President Morsi considers all this opposition as insignificant or just ordinary, or wants to say that he is just happy that there is an opposition in Egypt, well, it's not our aim to come out to please him. Our aim is to come out so he realizes we are here and that we should have a voice in the constitution that is being drafted. We don't have any presence in it at all. All of the civil forces have withdrawn and the church has withdrawn. So who is the constitution for? For the brotherhood only? Of course I reject it.
The draft constitution keeps in place an article defining the principles of Islamic law as the main source of legislation and is expected to be put to a nationwide referendum in the coming weeks. Luay Balqar for the news at 10.
In its latest effort to ratchet up economic pressure on Tehran over its nuclear program, the U.S. Senate resoundingly approved new sanctions on trade with Iran's energy, port, shipping, and shipbuilding sectors. Senators voted 94-0 to make the new sanctions part of an annual defense policy bill, which must still be approved by the Senate and House of Representatives before it would be given to the U.S. President to sign into law. Earlier, Iran's ambassador to the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, said any attack on Iran's nuclear facilities may lead to it withdrawing from the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Ali Asghar Sultaniya also suggested Iran, in such a case, could kick out IAEA inspectors and install its uranium enrichment centrifuges in more secure places. His comments highlighted concerns among many Western nuclear experts that military strikes against Iran to prevent it from developing weapons may be counterproductive and only drive its entire nuclear program underground. And back here at home, a peaceful sit-in was held after Friday prayers near the Interior Ministry in Amman in protest against the government's decision to lift subsidies. The demonstration, organized by the National Front for Reform, stressed the need to fight corruption, achieve comprehensive reforms, and scrap Wadi Araba peace treaty with Israel. Head of the front, former Prime Minister Ahmed Abedat, addressed the thousands of participants, affirming the need to press ahead with comprehensive reform. He also stressed the importance of maintaining a peaceful movement, pointing out that security and stability in the kingdom remain a red line. Abedat also slammed the current elections law and called for one that would produce a parliament that meets the aspirations of Jordanians. The United Nations has warned that time is running out on climate change, calling for urgent action to tackle the problem. 200 nations are meeting at a climate conference in Doha to try and reach a deal to cut emissions of greenhouse gases to avert floods, droughts, heat waves, and mounting sea levels. The talks are struggling to extend the UN's 1997 Kyoto Protocol, which binds most developed nations to cut emissions by at least 5.2% by this year. Instead, world emissions of carbon dioxide rose about 3% last year, largely because of strong growth in emerging economies. Rich nations say they want more action by the fast-growing emerging nations, including India, which is number 3 greenhouse emitter, and China second. But Russia, Canada, and Japan say they are pulling out of the Kyoto, leaving only a core group led by the European Union and Australia, while the United States never joined the pact. Head of the UN Climate Change Secretariat delivered a stark warning at the conference today, stressing the urgency of global action.
Here is for everyone to assume their own responsibility with impatience, because each one of us, whether we're an individual, whether we're the CEO of a corporation, whether we stand in a legislative body, each one of us needs to assume responsibility here. It's not just about domestic governments, it's about subnational governments, it's about city governments, it's about communities, it's about homes, it's about individuals, it's about private sector, it's civil society. So my call here is for all of us to act impatiently, assume our own responsibility, and contribute to the solution.
Mitt Romney may have lost his race to the White House, but he got a consolation prize as President Barack Obama had him over for lunch. The lunch, which lasted a little more than an hour, was a little more than a goodwill gesture, aiming to salve wounds left open from a bitter campaign. The focus of their discussion was on America's leadership in the world and the importance of maintaining that leadership position in the future. A White House statement said Romney congratulated Obama for the success of his campaign and wished him well in his second four-year term. White House spokesman Jay Carney told reporters that the president was interested in hearing some of Romney's ideas and sharing campaign experiences with him, but he added that there was no job offer for Romney in the works. Brussels is welcoming the festive season this year with an unusual Christmas tree. A 24-meter electronic tree is replacing the traditional one, causing mixed feelings from both tourists and residents. The metal installation features LED lighting and video projections and was designed by two French artists in a bid to create an environmentally friendly Christmas tree. Visitors can climb the stairs of the installation and enjoy a panoramic view of the Grand Place, one of Brussels' main tourist attraction and a UNESCO World Heritage Site, for only €4. The so-called tree, set to be inaugurated tonight, will be on display until December 28th. And over to the weather outlook. It continues to be relatively cold in the hilly areas tonight and moderate in other regions with southeasterly moderate winds. Tomorrow, similar conditions prevail with partly cloudy skies, southeasterly moderate to brisk winds. The Gulf of Aqaba should expect a cool night and relatively warm weather tomorrow with northerly moderate to brisk winds and calm seas. Here now is a look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. And to close, here's a reminder of the day's top stories. The 193-nation UN General Assembly overwhelmingly approves a resolution to upgrade the Palestinian Authority's observer status at the United Nations from entity to non-member state. The International Syria Mediator says no peace progress in Syria could be made unless it was backed by UN Security Council resolution, as heavy fighting in the capital Damascus is reported today. And tens of thousands of Egyptians continue their protests against Mohamed Morsi following the approval of the Islamist-led Assembly of new constitution, giving the president expanded powers. And with this, we come to the end of this edition of the news. I'm Alia Tuqan. Thank you for joining us. Have a good night, and I'll be back with you tomorrow.